Steve, can you hear me?
I like it.
Yes, I can.
Terrific. I'm just going to give you a heads up when we do have these hearings. I'll ask you to swear in the witnesses, okay?
Oh, sure.
Terrific. Good morning, Brett.
Good morning, Brad.
You don't have to wear it if you don't want.
Morning.
Good morning, I'm
Morning.
Joe. Morning, Mark.
Morning.
Morning, Regis. We're just waiting for Dave and we'll get to meet.
All right. Morning, Bert. Let me ask. Oh.
Steve here, Tony, what's that? He is.
Yes.
Thank you. Tony. Good, yeah, sure. Morning, Dave. All right, let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Thank you for coming. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, good morning, everybody. On this 28th day of June, I will note that all members are in attendance with Ms. Chappelle attending remotely. I will also move to approve the minutes for the June 14, 2021 board meeting. If there's a second. Second. Thank you, Mr. Wondolowski. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Now we're going to move on to some protest hearings we have, specifically for individuals running for candidate for the mayor of City East Cleveland. The first one is a protest against the candidacy of Sean L. Ward, candidate for the mayor of the City of East Cleveland. Is Mr. Ward here or attending remotely with his attorney? Is that it? Is Mr. Ward here? Hello, Regis, can you hear me?
Yes. I was muted. Yes, Mr. Chairman. My name is Regis McGann. Good morning to the board. I represent Mr. Ward, who's sitting next to me. Mr. Ward has some testimony he wants to give concerning the protest that was filed about his candidacy.
Got it. That's why we're having the hearing, Mr. McGann. Thank you. So we have Mr. Ward and Mr. McGann, his attorney here, and we have a memorandum of law from our attorney, Mr. Mark Marson, assistant prosecuting attorney, about these protests that the board has read. Also, the individual filing the protest is Justin Anderson. Is Mr. Anderson here? Or Miss Anderson? Is that Mr. Anderson? Yes, sir. Okay. Is here. So let me just kind of lay out the ground rules for both Mr. Ward and Mr. Anderson. I can assure you the board members have read very thoroughly the protest, the memorandum from our attorney, and will of course listen closely to Mr. Ward's testimony. We've also been provided by our staff documents regarding registration, address, and other matters that I know has been shared with Mr. Anderson and Mr. Ward, and I'm sure with you, Mr. McCann. What we'll first do is we have Mr. Lawler here too, who's in charge of candidate petitions services, our manager. I think we'll ask him to tee it up for us. We will then have you, Mr. Anderson, because you have the burden of proof here by clear and convincing evidence to maintain your protest. And then, of course, we're going to hear from you, Mr. McCann, and your client, okay? I just want to let you all know that we reserve the right to interrupt you, and we will. We may have questions while you're entering your testimony, but you'll certainly get a full opportunity to be heard today before the board makes a decision about this matter. Is that understood, Mr. Anderson? Mr. McGann, on behalf of your client, is that understood?
Yes, sir. Yes, it is, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Terrific. All right. Having said that, and if there are there any questions from you, Mr. Anderson, before we get started?
No.
Mr. McGann, on behalf of Mr. Ward, any questions?
No, there is not. No, there
Okay.
isn't.
All right, we're just getting a little lag there, I think, between when I comment and you were able to hear. All right, then, having said that, Manager Lawler, if you want to tee this up for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On June 16th, Justin Anderson filed a protest against Sean L. Ward's mayoral candidacy for East Cleveland. Mr. Anderson is a qualified elector of East Cleveland and is eligible to bring the protest. Basically, the protest is that Mr. Ward does not have the minimum 2-year consecutive qualified elector in East Cleveland as their charter states. We have a legal opinion from the law director, Hemmons, indicating that her opinion, he does not have to qualify in 2 consecutive years immediately prior to the subject election, and you have registration cards indicating that Mr. Ward moved into East Cleveland, registered with the Board of Elections on 5/15/2020, which is not the 2 years from the date of the election.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Anderson, if you want to come up here, please, sir. Mr. Anderson, I'm going to have you put under oath here by our court reporter, Steve, if you would swear in Mr. Anderson. If you raise your right hand, sir. He's a court reporter up there.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Anderson, it's your protest, your burden to carry by clear and convincing evidence to this board. What do you have to say and present to the board, sir?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board.
Good morning.
Pretty much has been summed up by Mr. Lawler here. In the East Cleveland Charter, under section 112, it reads the mayor qualifications and term of office. Section A, qualifications. The mayor shall have been for at least 2 consecutive years immediately prior to his or her election or appointment, a resident and qualified elector. I'll repeat that, a resident and qualified elector. So that means you have to be both, of the city of East Cleveland. During his or her term, the mayor shall remain a resident and qualified elector of the city and shall carry out his duties on a full-time basis. So it's pretty simple. You must be a resident 2 years prior to the election and a qualified elector 2 years prior to the election. As we could see from the documents that I submitted to the board, that Mr. Ward has a pretty lengthy voting history. And as we see, it looks like 11/2/4, it shows November 2nd, 2004, he voted in South Euclid. Same thing in 2006, twice. And same thing in 2008 once. And then he moved, it shows that he voted in Euclid November 3rd, 2009, in 2010. And then he went on to Richmond Heights, and he voted in Richmond Heights during the presidential election. Then it shows he went on November 5th of 2013. Then he was in Cleveland Heights, and he voted in Cleveland Heights 7 times he voted in Cleveland Heights. And then after that, he went on to Richmond Heights in 2018, and he cast his ballot in the general election in 2018. And then, which brings us here, November 3rd, 2020, he went on to East Cleveland And he voted in the East Cleveland presidential election, November 3rd, 2020. And as I read to you before, it said you must be a qualified elector 2 years prior to the election. And also, as you can see, Mr. Ward updated his voter registration from Richmond Heights to the city of East Cleveland on 5/15/20. That's not years prior to the election. That's, let's say a little over a year prior to the election. So that right there, in my opinion, shows he's not a qualified elector 2 years prior to the election for the city of East Cleveland. And pretty much, I don't want to waste much of the board's time because if you ask me, the evidence is simple. It's
So, Mr. Anderson, let me interrupt you, sir, okay? I follow what you said. We've got the documents here and support what you're saying to us. You're not questioning his residency, is that correct? You're questioning whether he's a qualified elector?
I am questioning his residency because as you can see,
So, excuse me, Mr. Anderson, what proofs do you have that he wasn't a resident for 2 years?
well, I mean, it looks like I'm questioning both, but it looks like he registered to vote on 5/15 and he voted in all these other cities. I would hope that he wasn't a resident of East Cleveland and voted in Richmond Heights and Cleveland Heights and Euclid and South Euclid. And I hope he wasn't a resident of East Cleveland.
Understood. Okay, anything else, Mr. Anderson?
That pretty much sums up Mr. Ward's.
Okay. We're gonna hear from Mr. McGann and Mr. Ward here in a moment. So if you'd have a seat up here because you may be asked some questions. I'll less ask if any of the board members have questions for Mr. Anderson at this point. No. Ms. Chappelle, any questions for Mr. Anderson at this point?
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Anderson. All right, Mr. McGann, can you hear us?
Yes, I can, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we're going to have, I understand you intend to have Mr. Ward testify, so we're going to have Mr. Ward sworn in by our court reporter. Mr. Ward, if you'd raise your right hand, sir. Can you see our court reporter?
Yes,
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Terrific. Mr. McGann, you have the floor, sir, as well as your client.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, my client's already been sworn in. I don't want to ask him questions. I want him to give a statement. And his statement is going to be focusing on the fact that he's been a qualified elector in East Cleveland, will have been a qualified elector in East Cleveland by the time of the November election, by the time that is held, and by the time that is certified in 2021 or thereafter. So I'm going to ask him to give testimony about the last 2 times he's voted. He has some records of that and about his residency. So, Mr. Ward.
Yes. Yes. So I did live in Richmond Heights for a period of time. Prior to that last November election, I was planning to move back to East Cleveland to my family home, which I did shortly after that election. So that election happened on November 3rd, I believe, November 2nd. But that before the end of that week, maybe Thursday or Friday, I had officially changed my residence to 14620 Alder Avenue. And that was in November of 2019. And I've been there since. And the change of address that was referenced was a change of address to the current location that I'm staying at now, which is 15411 Oak Hill Road.
I'm sorry. Sure, Mr. Wondolowski has a question.
Sir, did you say you moved, when did you move to East Cleveland?
I moved back to East Cleveland in November of 2019.
You don't have a specific date?
Before or after you voted in Richmond Heights?
It was after, it was that week of, it was the Thursday of that election week. That would have been the 5th or the 6th.
It would have been the 7th.
I have a question. It shows you voting on November 5th, 2019 in Richmond Heights.
Yes,
So you did vote in Richmond Heights in the 2019 election, correct?
I'm sorry.
You voted in Richmond Heights in the 2019 general election.
Yes,
That's all my questions.
Okay, Mr. Ward, if you voted on November 5th, is what you're testifying is that you moved on November 7th then, on the Thursday after the Tuesday?
right. That whole week I was already planning to move. That was my move week. And I completed my move that week, Thursday or Friday of that week, but I had started to move in that week.
So what about the issue of being a qualified elector, sir? It shows that you were registered to vote in East Cleveland on November 3rd, 2020.
That's when I actually changed my registration to the current address that I'm at now. When I moved back to East Cleveland, I first moved to my family home at 14620 Alder. And then I moved to the 15411 home eventually with the woman I married, and I brought a new family into East Cleveland to that address.
But you'd agree with me, you didn't register to become an elector in East Cleveland until November 3rd, 2020, correct?
That's correct.
And that's not within 2 years of the election, correct?
No, it's not.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions?
I don't know if it'd be appropriate, because it might be, his attorney may want to address this question. I guess that's my question, because section 112 clearly states a resident and qualified elector for the city for 2 years. It's not or, it's and, so it has to be both.
Right.
And even if you go off November 7th, 2019 as a moving date, this election, I believe, is November 2nd, 2021. So we're still, I mean, it says prior to the election. It doesn't say prior to taking office. So the 2 years would start, in my opinion, on the 2nd. You know, you could be looking at November 2nd, which even if you accept the 7th being a date you moved, you're still under 2 years. So.
Ms. Chappelle, any questions?
No, I had the same question. If Attorney McGann could answer, you know, when does from their perspective, you know, how does he interpret the qualified elector provision in the charter? If it's different from how, you know, we are interpreting it, or at least I would concur with the analysis that our colleague has given, unless, you know, if there's some countervailing consideration or something that, or argument that Attorney McGann could advance on behalf of Mr. Ward.
Mr. McGann, did you hear Ms. Chappelle's question?
Is that a question to Mr. Ward?
No, it was to you,
Well, it
Mr.
was a-
McGann. I was asking if you had an argument in support of what appears to be your, or perhaps your interpretation, although I heard your client testify that he, you know, what is your argument that the status, the requirement has been met under the charter?
Here's the argument. House Bill 166, effective in October 2019, it defines elector or qualified elector, and it defines it as, it means a person having the qualifications provided by law to be entitled to vote. When Mr. Ward moved to East Cleveland, he had the qualifications provided by law to be entitled to vote because he was a resident. He moved there. So he qualifies under that definition as a qualified elector. And he will have been a qualified elector in November of 2021 for 2 years.
But Mr. McGann, it'd be November 7th of 2021 if we go off his testimony, correct?
As a resident.
As a resident, yeah.
Well, when he's in the city, he has the qualifications provided by law to vote in that city. And Ohio does not even define the term resident in its code.
Mr. Musson, you just heard Mr. McGann talk about a House Bill 161 or something of that matter in 19. Is that something you're aware of? Was it referenced in your memorandum to us?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that was codified in Revised Code Section 3501.01N, where it defines an elector or qualified elector as a person having the qualifications provided by law to be entitled to vote. There are other provisions that come into play. The Ohio Constitution defines the qualifications of an elector as someone who has been a resident of the state and registered to vote for 30 days. So he was registered in Richmond Heights, but not in East Cleveland. And I believe the charter says a registered or a qualified elector in the city of East Cleveland. Just because he's entitled to vote in some other location, or the charter needs to mean something different. Resident and qualified elector mean two different things. Otherwise, it would just say resident. So I think the interpretation of the charter needs to be that you both are residing there 2 years prior to the election, which I misstated as the assumption of office in my memo, and also registered to vote in East Cleveland for that same period of time.
Thank you. And Mr. Lawler, we asked Ms. Hemmons, the law director, to give us an interpretation of their charter. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And I believe, and it's written here, and I think you've seen it, Mr. McGann, it's her conclusion that to be a qualified elector, you have to in fact be registered. And Mr. Musson, I see what your point is. You cite to 3501.01N, which Mr. McGann cited, and cited accurately, Mr. McGann did, but then you refer again to the Ohio Constitution, Article 5, Section 1, which defines a qualification of elector, and kind of marry those two definitions up and conclude that Ms. Hemmons' analysis is a correct analysis, or you can't object to her analysis. Is that correct?
No, I agree with her analysis. And under the elections manual, the Secretary of State says that we should defer to the law director for interpretations of their charter. That the board has its own independent duty to enforce the election laws and apply the election laws. But matters that arise exclusively under the charter, the law director is entitled to some deference, as long as the board doesn't have any strenuous or contrary opinion.
Thank you. Mr.
I just
McGann.
say, oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Go ahead, Ms. Chappelle.
So I just want some clarification, and maybe from our legal counsel, as to the difference between having an entitlement to vote by reason of your residency versus being registered to vote. Just want to make sure I understand your interpretation. I understand the argument. People move all the time. We expect them when they move and they become a resident of a particular jurisdiction that they will vote in that jurisdiction, or they certainly are qualified to vote if they reside there, even if they don't register. How is our definition of qualified elector limited only to having registered to vote? Just questioning a little bit more. I think we need a little bit more argument on that. Is there a difference between being entitled to vote? Yeah.
I believe there is.
Okay.
I would agree with that, but also the charter says entitled to vote in the city of East Cleveland. And I'm not sure that is met here where he's not registered at that address.
It's our argument that they're.
Mr. McGann?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. They're adding some conditions here. The definition is having the qualifications provided by law. Qualifications provided by law are the person is 18 years old, doesn't have a felony record. Not that he's registered to vote in East Cleveland or any place. The definition is rather broad. And I believe, my opponent is trying to refine it somewhat by saying that you have to be registered, but that's not what the definition indicates.
Mr. Chairman, I think we're looking at a revised code definition and trying to shoehorn that into the charter. The charter says a resident and qualified elector of the city of East Cleveland. I understand that to mean that they are entitled to vote in the city of East Cleveland.
Okay, that's the question. Entitled to vote or registered to vote? Is a qualified elector entitled to vote, or must they be registered to vote?
It's my understanding that you would need to be registered to be able to vote there.
And we feel that that's not the case. That's an added condition.
Mr. Chairman,
Disqualified.
let's, I don't think the ambiguity is there is being expressed by Mr. Ward's attorney, but let's talk just about the time frame. November 7th, 2019, the election is November 2nd, 2021. Clearly, that's not 2 years. 2 years is 365 days times 2. You don't meet the 2-year statute. So, Mr. Chairman, in light of that, I'm going to make a motion to decline to certify Mr. Ward's candidacy.
Okay.
By the time by the time the
Okay,
election
hold on.
is certified, it's 2 years.
Mr.
And
Chairman, if I could just clarify this.
Hold, 1 second. I'm going to make a second for the motion, okay? Now we're going to have conversation, all right? And we're not done. We can move this along now. So, Mr. McGann, do you have any other argument you'd like to present to the board? I don't want to cut you short, and I want to also let my members ask any other, the board members ask any other questions they may have about this before we take a vote. So, Mr. McGann, what would you like to add, sir?
Your Honor, although the vote may be in early November, it's in 2021, it's not going to be certified for 20 days plus. And that's the date that you look at it. It's not the date of the election. Some elections are not decided for weeks. But 20 days, I think, is a good rule because that's when most of them are certified.
I have a question. How are you, I mean, on the one hand, you're saying the protester or legal counsel for the city is inserting in a different requirement into the definition, but what is your authority for saying the time runs to the time the election certified? Where is that? Where's your support for that argument?
The election's not final. It's common knowledge it's not final until it's certified.
But what support are you, what's your argument that is the measure, the certification? Where do you find that in the any of the Constitution, the Charter, or any supporting legal authority that is the measure by which the timeline is counted to the certification of the election?
An office holder for mayor in East Cleveland cannot, it's refers to the election, and that's ambiguous. The election's not completed until it's certified.
Well, an election, I mean, okay, that's your interpretation of what the election language means in the Charter.
Yes, because they don't say election day, they don't say voting day, they say election.
But that could mean the day on which the election is held. It doesn't say that the day on which the election is certified. So that's what I'm trying to understand. So you're basically, that's your interpretation of what election means in that Charter.
Yes, that's true.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mr. McGann or Mr. Anderson? Okay, we have a motion on the floor concerning this matter. Well, Mr. Anderson, was there anything you wanted to add? And if there is, then Mr. McGann gets a chance to add too, so.
Oh, no.
Okay, all right. All right. Mr. McGann, anything else? Just before the board has a discussion, takes a vote on this matter.
Just one minor point, Mr. Chairman. When an election is not contested, it's assumed that the person wins on the day of election, but you can make that presumption when it's a contested election.
Understood. I think it's your position that someone isn't elected until he or she, and I'm reading the charter here, it actually says his or her election immediately, 2 consecutive years immediately prior to his or her election or appointment. Your position is no one is elected until it's actually certified. Is that correct, Mr. McGann?
That's correct.
Right. And therefore, if that were the case, he will have been a resident because it's his testimony that he moved in November 7th, that we weren't certified the November election until sometime after the 7th of November of this year, and therefore he'd qualify in that front. And I understand your argument. I have a little more problem getting my arms around being a qualified elector in light of the law director's interpretation and the memorandum of law we received from our clients. While he was eligible to register and vote in East Cleveland, he wasn't necessarily qualified as an elector based on the law that I read and marry it with the state constitution, Article 5, Section 1. So for that reason, and I really appreciate your argument, Mr. Gann. I follow it. I understand it. I understand why Mr. Ward is here challenging Mr. Anderson's protest. But based on the qualifications of an elector, I will support Mr. Wondolowski's motion. So, any other questions or comments from the board members? Ms. Chappelle?
I would just say, you know, in the past, it's my view, and even currently, that, you know, we really owe some deference to the law director's interpretation of the charter. And so for those reasons, I would also be supporting my colleague's motion on the floor. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion to uphold the protest, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. McGann, Mr. Sander, for your time today, and Mr. Anderson. Thank you. Mr. Ward, I'm sorry. Mr. Anderson, you have another protest here.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
do we uphold the protest and not certify it together?
that's correct. I'm upholding the protest. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Anderson, you have another protest here in front of the board. You understand what the process is. The individual that is being protested against, or the respondent, is Mr. Sigler. Is Mr. Sigler here? Okay, Mr. Sigler. Good. You heard earlier how we're going to proceed, Mr. Sigler? Okay, any questions about that process? Okay, great. We'll let Mr. Anderson, who has the burden here, to begin.
Members of the board, we kind of have a similar situation here as we just discussed. Mr. Sigler, per the records from the Board of Elections, registered his address to the city of East Cleveland on 10/5/2020. So October 5th, 2020, he registered in the city of East Cleveland pursuant to section 112, which I read into the record earlier. He does not meet the qualified elector or residency requirements. East Cleveland, as we all know, is a home rule city, so it's governed by a charter, which means we have to follow the laws of our city charter. We know there is state laws and constitutions, but East Cleveland is a home rule city. As you can see from what I submitted to the board, is that Mr. Sigler's voter registration card, updating his address to 12900 Superior, apartment 209. That's a senior citizen and disability home. He registered to that address. And also, when we check out Mr. Sigler's voting record, it shows that on November 3rd, 2020, that from the records that I obtained from the Board of Elections, it shows that he voted for the first time in East Cleveland on November 3rd, 2020, which, if we go by what was discussed, is still, he's actually over a year out. So yeah, so the first time he voted in East Cleveland was November 3rd, 2020. Prior to that, from the records, it shows he didn't vote since November 6, 2012. So it seems he waited 8 years to vote, and he decided that he would vote in East Cleveland for the first time. With all that being said, so I won't take up too much of the board's time. It's simple in my opinion that Mr. Sigler doesn't meet the qualifications as a resident or qualified elector in the city of East Cleveland. That'll be it.
And Mr. Anderson, so I remind you, continue to be under oath since we swore you in already. the previous. So it's your position that Mr. Sigler doesn't qualify either as a qualified elector or as a resident, sir? Is that your position?
Yeah,
And what's the residency based on?
I mean, the residency is based, I just go by the voter registration, because Ohio law says that you must, wherever you're registered to vote at, that's where you have to be living. So I would hope that Mr. Sigler wasn't registered to vote at, let's see, his Cleveland address. Okay, I think it says Union, 12510 Union Avenue. I would just hope that Mr. Sigler wasn't registered to vote at his Union address and voted in 2012 and kept his voter registration card to that Union address, but he was actually living in East Cleveland. It's just the same basis of that. And as far as the qualified elector, he just voted for the first time in East Cleveland on November 3rd, 2020.
Okay, Mr. Anderson. Any questions for Mr. Anderson from the board? All right, thank you, Mr. Anderson. Mr. Sigler, why don't you come up here, sir? We're going to swear you in, and then you can present. Mr. Sigler, if you raise your right hand, sir. Mr. Steve, if you'd swear in.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Thank you. Mr. Sigler, what do you have to say to the board?
Yes, things that Ms. Anderson says kind of true. I went homeless prior to me signing up to be married. I was living with my friend, actually his father, D'Angelo Walker, which is a elderly home, but he allowed me to come in that home. In the charter, it says a section 30-A residency and requirement. It says that every employee or employer or person on the board have to be a bona fide resident within 6 months after they're appointed. My first role going around getting signatures was the business owners and employees and employers in East Cleveland that was not registered to vote. Does that mean we fire them for going against the charter? Does that mean we take out half of East Cleveland because the charter specifies something? Now, I didn't try to trick nobody. My heart was in East Cleveland, so I went for it. There's a couple of laws that I didn't know, but now I do. There's a couple of people here at the Board of Election know I've been here numerous times to get the job done. I'm back again. So I'm saying, if we're gonna follow the charter, then let's follow it. Everybody who is not registered or resident of East Cleveland, as the charter says, should be eliminated from the city if we're following the charter. I don't think it's fair to pick and choose who you go after. Now, I should have been aware of the rules, trying to take on such a high position, but I wasn't. I'm learning, I'm still learning. I went homeless in East Cleveland in 2018. I helped clean it up a little bit. I helped dirty it up a little bit. Now I'm trying to throw out the pieces back together and get the job done. I don't want to let this be the reason why I get off the ballot. My intentions was not to break the rules, but better. I do think we need a better and stronger charter in East Cleveland that specifies things like what an elected voter is of the city. That's all I got to say.
Well, Mr. Sigler, I appreciate your impassioned plea. I really do, and your sincerity. And no one is accusing you of breaking rules, sir, okay? We have rules to follow, and sometimes people misunderstand them or there's confusion, but there's no reason to say you're at fault for anything.
Oh, yeah,
And, you came up here and gave so you'd agree that you registered in October 2020 to vote in East Cleveland because that's where you live, correct? Right. And when did you move into East Cleveland? Was it about October or so?
No, it was like 2018.
2000, just after you found some housing.
Yeah, my dude D'Angelo Walker brought me in.
Right. And you have a place to stay now?
I'm working on it.
You're working on
I'm working on it right now, as we speak, because I got a lot of opportunities at my hand. The pandemic came and it funded me.
Right.
So I got a lot of opportunities right now, you know. East Cleveland, gonna work, stay there for a year into the little, you know, if I make a lease, into the lease up, and then I was gonna explore my horizon.
I appreciate that, Mr. Sigler. Are there any questions from the board members for Mr. Sigler?
No, I would make the motion, though, that for the same reasons and in deference to the law director's interpretation of the charter, that we would uphold the protest and deny the certification on the basis that Mr. Sigler's not been a qualified elector, meaning a registered elector in the city of East Cleveland for the required 2-year prior period.
Thank you, Ms. Chappelle. Is there a second?
I'll second, but Mr. Chairman, I'll add, it's admirable what you've done and what you've come from and where you are today. And don't let this be a setback for you. You can do great things, and it looks like that's what your desire is to do. Don't let this be a barrier for you. Just learn from it, grow from it, and continue to be a good resident of East Cleveland, okay?
All right, Mr. Sigler, thank you very much. And just to remind you, if you happen to move, make sure you update your registration, okay?
Yeah.
All right, we've got a motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion or comment? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion and not to certify Mr. Sigler to this year's ballot, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Thank you, Mr. Sigler, for your time.
Absolutely.
Thank you. All right, we have the wonderful opportunity to present a resolution of honor and appreciation for Kathleen Bradley. I know Ms. Bradley's here. Ms. Bradley, you want to come on up if you would like to? Here, Ms. Bradley, why don't you come up here? We're going to present you with a resolution, okay? And then give you an opportunity to say something. Come on up here. Thank you for coming down. Ms. Bradley and I first met in early June, and I know Mr. Wondolowski were there, Ms. Sticken, at the Secretary of State's summer conference, along with the director and deputy director, and was really, really impressed that Ms. Bradley was nominated for the precinct election official of the year for the entire state of Ohio. And there were 400 to 500 election officials there, from directors to board members to PEOs, and you did us proud, Ms. Bradley. You really did. You came down with, I think, your sister or sister-in-law?
My brother and my cousin.
Right, all the way from Columbus, or from Cleveland.
My brother was from West Virginia.
And West Virginia, okay. Did you have some time to visit each other down there?
Yeah, a few minutes.
Well, on behalf of the board, Ms. Bradley, we want to share with us our earned gratitude for you using skills and experience for the last 7 years through 12 elections to serve the voters in this community and exercising the right to vote. You exemplify positive attitude, commitment to service, and grace under pressure that all the election officials should strive to attain. You've earned the highest ratings possible for voting location manager, although we can't give you an increase in pay, I'm sorry. Receiving excellent scores from your management abilities, and have demonstrated and you've demonstrated ability to manage one of the largest polling locations in Cuyahoga County. She's gone above and beyond the call of duty to work closely with the board administrators and provide suggestions on how to improve voting process, including a more efficient method of serving voters with mobility issues. And when I was reading her and congratulating her in Columbus, she did make a request that she'd like to be traded to another polling location. And it's going to be hard to deny her request, but it's even a larger one. She just wants to work there with some other people she knows. So she's, did you say a larger one or a smaller one? I can't remember. But Ms. Bradley, thank you so much for coming down here. Thank you.
Well, thank you for nominating me.
Well, on behalf of the board, thank you so much for your time and talent in promoting fair, accurate, and transparent elections in Cuyahoga County. Well, let's take a picture up and give you a few moments to say something, okay?
Oh, no, they said I didn't have to talk.
No, you don't have to talk. You want to take your mask on?
Oh, sure.
I'm vaccinated, so. Okay, terrific. Well, thank you. You brought some paper with that. Thank you, Ms. Bradley. Okay, on to item 5. I will move, well, Mr. Cleary is here. Why don't you tee that up for Mr. Cleary? And
Ronnie Clary, Manager, Ballot Department. On June 14th, the Ballot Department conducted a risk limiting post-election audit for the May 4th election. We selected member of council, Parma Ward 7. There were a total of 38,307 ballots cast in the election. A hand count was conducted of 434 ballots, or 8 unique batches. All results matched the official canvas, giving us 100% accuracy.
thank you. I'll move to certify the post-election audit for the May 4th, 2020 primary election. Are there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Cleary? All right, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Terrific. I'll move, we're on to the approval. I'll move to approve the outsourced printing and mailing of vote by mail ballots for the September 14, 2020 primary election. If there's a second?
Second.
Right. Are there any questions? I guess I do have a question. What are we're outsourcing to Midwest Direct, is that correct? Okay.
Right, so at the beginning of the year with the changes to the election official manual, this is now a new requirement for boards. If they're interested in using a third party, you have to have board action, which is what we're here to do today. And then from that, then we submit an application to the Secretary of State's office, which includes who the vendor is, timelines that we will ensure that we make what we need to do, as well as copies of our contract.
I see. That's why we're doing this, because of the directive.
Correct.
Requirement, because we've already actually approved the contract.
That is correct.
I see.
Yes.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion passes. Thank you, Mrs. Chappelle. And then I will also approve to outsource the printing and mailing of vote by mail ballots for the November 2nd, 2020 general election, if there's a second.
Second.
Thank you. Any question or comment? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. I move to approve the certification of candidates for the September 14, 2021 primary election. I guess before I do that I'll make that motion if there's a second.
Second.
Then have Mr. Lawler address us. Is there anything to talk about, sir?
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have 7 petitions, candidate petitions that are insufficient. The first one on the agenda is Ivan J. Williams, Cleveland Council Ward 7. On May 28th, the candidate filed 235 signatures. Of that was 62 valid. As we know, the City of Cleveland provides for an additional 5 days once we notify them to file supplemental petitions. He filed an additional 69 signatures, and as of 6/8, with the 2 filings, he was still short 29 signatures. Therefore, we recommend that he does not meet the qualifying minimum signatures, and that he not be certified to the September 14th primary election.
And let me just go through this. Mr. Lawler has prepared us a summary of all these, setting forth what he just explained to us about Mr. Williams, and he's going to continue on with other candidates here. I do, and then we have some discussion about 2 other petitions from candidates too to talk about. I do know Mr. Williams had written to the board and wanted to at least lodge a complaint or ask the board to extend his period of time. And we might as well discuss that now. Is Mr. Williams here? Is in attendance here? Because we are in receipt of his letter. Is he here? I'm sorry? Ivan J. Williams. Mr. Ivan J. Williams. Okay, that's the individual who's going to run for council, I believe, in the city of Cleveland. And as Mr. Lawler explained to us, staff is not recommending he be certified for the reasons that are on the record, not sufficient signatures. All right, I will, do we want to take these one at a time, Mr. Lawler? Is that best? Please. Okay, I will acknowledge receipt of Mr. Williams' complaint, the fact that all the board members have received it, and just for the record, explain that we are not in a position to extend that period of time that's set by and established by law under the Cleveland City Charter. So I want to thank him for making those comments, but the reason is why this board can't extend it is for the reasons I just stated. So I will move not to certify Mr. Williams for the reasons set forth by Mr. Law. If there's a second.
Second.
Thank you. Any question or comment? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you, Mr. Lawler.
The next candidate is Levita Murray, Cleveland Council Ward 6. She initially filed 306 signatures. Of those were 143. And given 5 additional days. She filed another 92, bringing her total number of valid to 184. So she is also short 16 valid signatures. And again, we recommend that she not be certified for not having the qualifying minimum.
I will move not to certify the candidacy of Ms. Levita Murray, if there's a second. Second. Ms. Murray here to comment? Hearing none. Any questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. Mr. Lawler?
The third candidate is Igor Travinsky, perhaps, Cleveland Council Ward 5. He initially filed 284 signatures, 94 were valid. He was short 106. He did not file any supplementals. And he was notified by email, writing, and phone call about the meeting desk withdrawn. I have not heard from him.
Terrific. I will move to not certify the petitions of the candidacy of Mr. Igor Tomofsky. There's a second? Second. Any question or comment? Is Mr. Tomofsky here? Okay, hearing none, nothing from the board. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 And that's, all right.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Paul.
Guy Coleman Jr., Cleveland Council Ward 9. He filed 208 signatures, 907 were valid. He was short 93. He did not file any supplemental. And we ask that you not certify him to the ballot.
I will move not to certify Mr. Coleman to the ballot for Cleveland Council Ward 9. If there's a second. Second. Mr. Coleman, are you present? Any questions from the board or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
It passes unanimously. Mr. Lawler?
The next candidate is Denise Duncan Downing, Cleveland Council Ward 12. She filed 229 signatures. None of her petitions were valid, so we didn't even check signatures, so she had 0. She was notified she was short 200. She filed her supplemental with 252. Of those, she only had 13 valid, and so she is short 187. We would ask that you not certify her to the September primary.
I will move not to certify Ms. Denise Duncan Downing to the Cleveland Council Ward 12 candidacy. If there's a second. Second. Any question or comment from the board? Ms. Duncan Downing, are you present? Okay, hearing no further comment or questions. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Ms. Chappelle and Mr. Lawler.
And the next candidate is Bishop Chu, I believe it's Council Ward 9. He initially filed 220 signatures. Of those are 34 valid, making it 166 short. He filed a supplemental and ended up with only 23 valid signatures. And we asked that he not be certified to the ballot.
I will move to not certify Mr. Bishop Chu to the Cleveland Council Ward 12 ballot for November. If there's a second. Second. Any questions or comments from the board? Is Mr. Chu present? Okay. Mr. Chu, you're here? Did you want to say anything to the board, sir? Okay, no comment. Thank you for coming down to our meeting. Hearing no comment from Mr. Chu or the board members or questions, I move all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. You're not Mr. Lawler, about Ms. Torrin Williams.
Tori Williams, Cleveland Council Ward 4. Signatures filed with 202, valid with 28, making the petition 172 short. She filed the supplement. He filed the supplemental, and it was still short 129 valid signatures. And we asked that the board not certify him to the ballot.
All right, I'll move not to certify Mr. Torrin Williams to the Cleveland Council Ward 4 ballot for the November election. If there's a second. Second. Thank you. Is Mr. Williams present?
Yes, I am.
Did you want to say anything to the board, Mr. Williams? Okay, come on up here, sir. Good morning, Mr. Williams.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming down.
I'm running for Cleveland City Council and Ward 4. I'm speaking today because the process of the ruling here. I feel as if the ruling is an error. I feel as if the process needs adjustments. I read here in the signer rules that all signers, to the best of the calculator's knowledge and belief, were qualified to sign my petition. I believe this when I walked out in the streets and got way more than enough signatures. Not 202, I counted 409, and through my recount with the studies from, thank you, Brent, with the studies from Brent's office, I counted 392, or 300, closer to 362. I have the figure written here on paper. I don't feel as if it's honest. I really feel as if we need adjustment here for average citizens on the ground like myself, someone who would be doing petition work. We wouldn't go into the ORV or RC codes unless warranted. You know, we see something saying that our signatures will be kicked back if voter isn't registered, if they happen to move, if they happen to not update this information. I'm going to take this solely myself and make sure a lot more people are being registered. I'm going to make sure a lot more people are paying close attention to how our election process works. However, due to the error in the writing, due to my knowledge, and due to the people who signed this petition knowledge, they weren't aware that their signatures would be kicked out if their information wasn't up to date. And I wasn't either. That's why I'm here pushing for my name to be on the ballot and for my name not to be removed. I feel as if I have more than enough signatures for the time frame that I captured as well. The time frame was from June 1st to June 21st. And I have some thoughts here that I've been working on as far as a possible restructuring. Anyone wants to take a look at it, I'll be sharing these thoughts. That's all I want to say. I want to thank y'all for having me, and I appreciate y'all graciously. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Williams, for putting your hat into the ring to run for public office and commenting to the board today, okay? Thank you. And if I understand your position, it's that you thought that anybody that signed the petition should be counted. You didn't understand that you had to actually be registered, correct?
Well, it's not listed to my section of people. You know, I wouldn't even begin. I'm not saying I can't understand English, but I wouldn't even begin to think about how many signatures I would lose based on people not being registered, based on people not having updated information, if it's not included in the rules on the first page. Like, that's something that should be in immediately, you know, just for our growth and development as a unit.
Thank you, Mr.
You know,
Williams.
not just for myself.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
I think we have a motion and a second. We've heard from Mr. Williams. Any other questions or comments from the board? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of the motion not to certify Mr. Williams' ballot or candidacy to the November ballot in Cleveland Ward 4 signify by saying aye.
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 All right, passes unanimously. Thank you. We have some discussion concerning two candidates that are, petitions of two candidates. Mr. Director Palalti, who's going to tee that up?
I think, so at this point, there are two candidates who we came across some unusual activity on the petitions. One of them actually withdrew. And so I don't know if we would want to talk about that now or talk about that on the withdrawal part, but the other definitely pertains to someone who we will be asking for you to certify to the November ballot. I guess I'll start with that, if that's okay.
Please.
And that would be for Justin Bibb, candidate for Cleveland mayor. And so I'll start off with Mr. Bibb. He submitted in sufficient petitions after staff reviewed in order to make the ballot. For City of Cleveland, you have to have 3,000 ballot signatures and Mr. Bibb has that. As staff reviewed the petitions, what they noticed on, it was on 42 of the part petitions that were received. So we received 440 individual part petitions. On 42 of those part petitions, it was noticed that in the address line of some of the signers, the address was crossed through and an alternate address was written on the part petition. The handwriting of that alternate address written is pretty uniform amongst all 42 parts. And they are not initialed. And when looking at that penmanship of the alternate address that's written there, it does not match up with the penmanship of the person who's completed the circulator statement on the individual part petitions. So that came to our attention that something doesn't seem to be correct there. And in almost all instances, but not quite all, the address that was crossed out was invalid, and then, or was not current, and the address that was written in on the part petition would have taken a invalid line on the petition from not registered at and made it a valid registration line. We had some preliminary conversations with the Bibb campaign, and from what we found so far at this point is that some of the circulators who circulated these part petitions indicated they did not cross off that signature line. So when they turn them in, whoever collects them for the campaign, it wasn't in that fashion. And so now what we're looking to do is see who in fact is the person who crossed those off. Some of these campaigns hired individuals who do quality assurance, who would come down and view at public terminals to try to get a gauge on where they stood as far as number of valid signatures. Potentially a hunch, maybe that individual may have done it, but we don't know. We don't have that statement at this point in time. All that being said, if we take the 42 part petitions that have one or more cross-throughs on it, and we just discount all the signatures on those pages, even the ones that there's no question about, Mr. Bibb still has sufficient signatures to make a ballot. It's over 3,000. So even if none of those were included, there is sufficiency to happen there.
Let me just ask this, and maybe, I don't know who has the answer to this, but if petition, if it is been defaced, I'll use that word, and someone changed the address after the fact, would it still be, can it still be counted, or is the entire part petition not going to be counted? If something like that, if we were to find someone did something inappropriately.
I don't know if we've ever had
I don't know that we've had a
particular one.
My recommendation would be withdraw the whole part petition because you've altered the, well, I take that back.
No.
I'm talking about, yeah. On this one, I would just cross out, I would not count those lines.
Those lines. But I mean, what staff is saying is, let's just not count the whole part petition. He still qualifies for the ballot. So there's no issue about him qualifying. Correct. Right. Okay. Thank you.
That would be our recommendation.
Right. And I'm glad you brought this to the board's attention. We do have a duty to investigate irregularities under the code. And if it's at the proper time, I don't think it's now, but at the proper time, I'd like the staff to come back to the board and share your findings with us. We can have a discussion among ourselves about how to proceed then at that time. Those are my thoughts and comments. I don't know how the other board members feel.
I'd agree with your comments.
I mean, the handwriting does look awful similar on these.
Mr. Ball, any comments?
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, it looks from our materials that there are 39, almost 4,000 valid signatures. So I don't think there's an issue about certifying this candidate to the ballot, but I would agree that, you know, we should probably take a look after staff's recommendation to investigate this irregularity in terms of the change and crossing out and change of the address.
Thank you, Ms. Chappelle. It would appear at this point, and just very summarily, that someone went back to found the wrong address of somebody, scratched it out, and then replaced it with a correct address. We don't know who that is or what motivated them, how they were directed, why they thought they could do that, all that. And so staff will come back to us with a more thorough investigation in a timely manner, and we'll figure out how we're going to proceed. Mr. Musson, anything in addition? I asked him as our attorney.
No, Mr. Hastings, I think I concur with everything that was stated. I think we still need to develop the facts before we present a full recommendation.
Terrific. Okay, thank you. There's no motion needed to be taken now. Mr. Simmons, though, we have, do you want to have a discussion now on that, Mr. Vaughn? Yes. Okay, or Mr. Galati?
We can do that. So Mr. Simmons, Landry Simmons, also submitted in petitions for mayor of the city of Cleveland. And through reviewing those petitions, first we found that he did not have a sufficient number of signatures to make the ballot. And so, as we had heard about earlier, City of Cleveland has additional 5 days. Going through that process of the initial submission, the 5 days of submission, Mr. Landry still is 107 signatures short of having the 3,000. So we won't be asking for him to be certified to the ballot today. However, again, in reviewing, staff reviewing through the part petitions, we did not find an issue with the signature lines on the petition, but it came down to the circulator statements. And what we found on several of the circulator statements, there were 425 part petitions submitted, and on 57 of those, where the number is written of signatures witnessed, that the signer witnessed signing on there, on 57 of these part petitions, it was crossed through and a alternate number was written. On almost all of them, there were initials next to that marking on the circulator. Looking at those initials did not match up with the initials of the actual circulator themselves of that part petition. Again, we had some preliminary conversation with the candidate himself. He was not aware of how that happened, and he himself had circulated a few of the part petitions. They weren't in that state when he kind of turned them over to his crew to do what they needed to do. We haven't been able to dive deep in this, but that's kind of where we are with it. What is kind of interesting is that it seems like in almost all instances, the number that was written was crossed out and was lowered, and it matched what the number of signatures were on the part petition. However, if no activity had been taken per the rules of reporting signatures, it still would have been good. So for example, 18 was written, it was crossed off, a 17 was put, there were 17, however, the 18 would have been sufficient had it never been touched or modified.
Right.
And so, again, so that's what we had. So we have these 57 part petitions where the number was altered, and initials are there, initials don't match the circulator, and we don't know who made those changes to the circulator statement. No one is supposed to do that except for the circulator.
Sure.
All right, thank you. So we're going to be looking into that and reporting back to the board too. Okay. Because it would appear, just again, at its initial blush, you have 18 signature lines filled out, appear to be 2 kind of scratched up by somebody, and so they changed it to 16. Thinking, and I get what's happening, but I don't know why, So. All right, we'll wait to hear back from the board there, but regardless, Mr. Simmons didn't qualify, but he didn't have enough signatures, is that correct?
That's correct. He is withdrawn.
Oh, he is withdrawn. Okay. All right then, thank you for that update. Let's move on to the next item of business. We've move on to the certification of candidates. Are we on to the certification of candidates for the September 14, 2021 primary election? Correct, Mr. Waller?
Just for the record, the 2 candidates that under the protest are not included on this list. Just in fact, it being said that.
Okay, so we have as agenda item 8, certification of candidates for September 14, 2021 primary election. I'll move to certify those candidates set forth in our agenda in our board package for the cities of Bay Village, Bedford Heights, Brook Park, Cleveland, Garfield Heights, Maple Heights, North Olmsted. We have Olmsted Falls, Rocky River, Seven Hills, Solon, to be certified to the ballot for September 14th, 2021 primary election. If there's a second?
Second, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Katie Village, you said?
Yes.
Those are in lieu of, those are being, they do not have a primary?
Okay, Canada's not without a primary election, I see.
Correct.
So we can, without a primary election, that's 9. So 8, right? Let me move back then, that was premature. So I will move to certify the candidates for September 14, 2021 primary election as set forth in our agenda. If there's a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Wendolowski. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion, thank you, Ms. Chappelle. Motion, yeah. All right. Sir, now, what are we on to? There's a list here, Mr. Law, says certification of candidates nominated without a primary election.
So those are candidates that filed for September that do not have a primary, which move automatically to November.
Okay, and so that isn't,
It used to be called in lieu of.
okay, so now we're going to certify the candidates nominated without primary election. I will move to certify the candidates nominated without primary election for the September 14th primary, the September 14th primaries will be canceled for these individuals as set forth in our agenda. If there's a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any question or comment? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion passes. Thank you, Ms. Chappelle. I will move to certify independent candidates to the November 2nd, 2021 general election as set forth in our agenda. If there's a second.
Second.
Thank you. All those candidates, Mr. Lawler, correct, from the city of Brook Park. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion passes unanimously. I will move to acknowledge the candidate withdrawals as set forth in our agenda, and specifically withdrawals for the September 14th primary election in Brook Park Mayor, David Morris, Landry Simmons in Cleveland for Mayor, Xavier Allen in Ward 4, Cleveland, LaShawn Caldwell, Ward 4, Cleveland, Dantes Taylor, Ward 4, Cleveland, Antoinette Tolbert, Ward 4, Cleveland, Antoinette Carter, Antone Tolbert, and now Antoinette Carter, Ward 7 in Cleveland, Jonathan Collins in Ward 9, and East Cleveland Mayor, Mr. Sigler, withdrew twice, Mr. Dudley for Garfield Heights Mayor, and James Johnson in Garfield Heights Ward 2. A withdrawal of the candidates for the November 2nd general election, Mr. Troyer in Brook Park for Mayor, and Mr. Borowski in Brooklyn as a Board of Education member. If there's a second.
Second.
Thank you. Any question or comment? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And I will move to acknowledge the notice. We got everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. I will move to acknowledge the notice of intent to retire from elected office of Mr. Single, City of Brook Park, Director of Finance and Taxation. If there's a second.
Second.
Thank you. Any question or comment? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, I will move to approve to appoint, thank you, Ms. Chappelle. I will approve to appoint not less than 2 precinct election officials for each precinct pursuant to the revised code section 3501.22. The September 14th, 2021 primary election. If there's a second. Second. Thank you. This is something we have to do for every election. If any question or comment, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you, Ms. Chappelle. Motion passes unanimously. And I will move to approve or to award a contract for Enhanced Voting LLC to provide services to make available remote absentee ballot delivery and marking systems for the use by a voter with a disability during the Ohio by mail absentee voting for all elections occurring between July 17, 2021 through May 31st, 2022, in the amount not to exceed $18,000. If there's a second.
Second.
Thank you. Ms. Susi, thank you. Could you give us a brief explanation of what we're doing here? And
Sure. In 2018, well, sorry, Country Susie, Fiscal Manager, Board of Elections. In 2018, per SOS Directive 2018-3, required all boards of elections in the state of Ohio require, install, and test a remote absentee ballot delivery and marking system for use by a voter with a disability during the Ohio by mail absentee voting period. The initial contract was bid, evaluated, and subsequently awarded to Democracy Live for a total cost of $37,734.65, for which it included setup and installation for an initial term of 1 year and 2 renewal periods of $7,500 per year, which ends July 17, 2021. A request for bid was issued then for the next term on June 4th. We contacted the 5 vendors in the state of Ohio who are certified. And as part of that bidding process, the vendors were invited to give a demonstration of the product. 4 out of the 5 participated. We received 2 bids, one from the current vendor, Democracy Live, in the amount of $19,000, and one from Enhanced Voting for $18,000. Enhanced Voting was the lowest and best responsive bidder. A notable difference between this contract and the last contract is the inclusion of sample ballots for the Board of Elections website to be utilized for any and all voters. Patrick Ackley was involved in the first one. He's here and available to answer any questions.
Thank you. And so this allows a disabled voter to use the computer to create his or her own ballot, is that correct?
Right, correct. So, so what we're required to do for the directive that can be cited is someone who has a disability fills out a similar but different vote by mail application, and then that comes in, we process it. What we're able to do is send them through email and electronic ballot. And so with the accessible tools that they have at their home, so for example, if they're blind, maybe they have a PDF reader, it'll read the ballot. They're able to mark the ballot electronically on their computer, but then ultimately when they're done voting, they print the ballot and they do have to mail that back to us. So it gives them the opportunity to participate in the vote by mail process, even though they may have a disability that presents some challenges in the voting process.
Thank you. Do you have any idea, I don't know if you have the answers, how many people participate in this approximately? Is it hundreds or dozens?
No, so I would say, unfortunately, since we started doing this in November 2018, we probably have had not more than 6 people collectively utilize it.
Thank you. Any question or comment for staff? Thank you for the update. Okay, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. We have a human resources, we have a personnel agenda. Mr. Pilati?
Sure. So we have a personnel agenda today where we have 3 individuals who would like to consider employment actions on them. The first is for registration assistant manager, our assistant manager position in the registration department. And we're bringing forward a gentleman by the name of Aaron Adams. We posted this position, received 30 applications. It was on Indeed, county website, our website, and from that, the interview panel brought it down to 6 candidates who then went through first round interviews, and then the top 2 candidates came for second round interviews. The second round interviews were with manager Betty Edwards, deputy director Tony Gallagher, and Lori Casa, the HR manager. From that, Mr. Adams came out as what we believe to be the best qualified candidate. He has been an administrator, supervisor, and an analyst for many large corporations in the Northeast Ohio area, including Case Western Reserve, American Greetings, and working with Cleveland Clinic and university hospitals. He has managed business operations for a variety of staff, meaning from clerical entry-level positions to researchers and high-level technicians. So his ability to supervise, take an approach to performance management through data analysis and cross-training employees will be beneficial in that department. We talked to his resources and they came back with supported all the things that we learned about in the interview. And so we would like to recommend him for registration department assistant manager. The next item is an election official 1 in election support department. That's Jamie Coleman. Jamie Coleman actually retired from the Board of Elections in 2018. He retired from being a supervisor in the registration department. Prior to working for us, while he was a full-time employee for Cuyahoga County Health and Human Services, he was one of our co-worker trainers. And after retiring from us, he continued to stay on as a trainer and has been a top trainer for us. As a young retiree, he's not ready to retire from the workforce totally, and we had really good positive experiences with him, and so he saw this opportunity and became very interested. While he was employed with us as a permanent employee, he actually was a zone station backup which is one of the kind of like field reps on election day who would run a mini zone station. And he did that with election support, and he did it multiple times, and most recently actually in the November presidential election. And he does it well without pause. And so the management team there are excited when he expressed interest in wanting to come back. And everyone has worked well with Jamie. He's just always been a positive employee for us. The last item on the personnel agenda is a assistant manager for the ballot department, and we're asking for the promotion of Steve Uchukis. Steve has been an employee here with the Board of Elections, I believe, for 14 years. Started off as a temp, I think working with Brett and Betty and vote by mail and registration, and worked his way up to supervisor in the ballot department. He has an excellent work ethic. He's the first one to put his hand up to volunteer for any kind of assignment or task, and has worked with Brian over the years in learning ballot coding and actually being a part of the bipartisan team to offset Brian as we create the ballot and proof. Steve last year, through the very high volume of vote by mail, took on the oversight of trying to get all those ballots open and counted. As Jessica King, our other assistant manager, really focused a lot on the returning and the signature verification. So he's been a team player versed in all the aspects, and with his demeanor and work ethic, I think he'd be a good role model for promotion in that department.
Thank you, Mr. Pilati. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Okay, hearing none, I will move to approve the personnel agenda as set forth by Mr. Pilati and as set forth in our agenda today. If there's a second? Second. Thank you. Any question or comment? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All right, motion passes unanimously. Now to an update on the August 3rd, 2021 special congressional election.
Yeah. We have that as upon us. We can't forget about it. As today we talked about September 14th, the entirety of the time. Before you know it, we'll be talking about November. But the August 3rd, 2021 11 congressional primary, we do have 27 municipalities in that election, 513 precincts, and we have 157 voting locations. It is a partisan primary where we have a Democratic and a Republican ballot available. On the Democratic ballot, there are 13 candidates, and on the Republican ballot, we have 2 candidates. So with that being a primary election, we have to ensure that when people vote by mail, they have to indicate a party type in order for it to be a valid application. The close of registration is next week on Tuesday, July 6th. Typically, closed registration is a Monday. However, Monday, July 5th is the observance of the July 4th holiday. And so we're closed, and per directive, closed registration votes or rolls to the next day. Again, Tuesday, July 6th at 9 p.m. is a close of registration for that election. And then EIP follows on Wednesday, July 7th at 8 a.m. For this particular election, there will be one weekend of voting. That will be the weekend before the election day. We have received about 1,000 vote by mail applications thus far for the election. It is lower than we wanted it to be. We're hoping the voter information guide that we mailed out is hitting mailboxes, and that usually is a spark up in activity for applications. So hopefully that does happen.
Tony, what would you, in a typical election like this, although it's not typical, what should the number be about now in terms of?
Would you think like 3 to 5 about?
3 to 5,000?
Yeah.
And we have 1,000.
1,000. Yeah. So it's lacking where it should be. We will on day one, whatever applicant. So we've already sent our first file to Midwest Direct. So those ballots will be available, as well as we are sending additional files to send it out.
What's your expectation for turnout in that election?
I'm going to get that at the end.
Okay.
Yeah. Being very optimistic. But well, I am going to get into that. So, as far as PEOs, we need about 2,000 PEOs. We have hired a little over 1,000 at this point, 53%. So we're kind of where we need to be for that. I did email to the county, to the HR director and communications director last Thursday to basically want to activate their new PEO employee program. And so I'm waiting to hear back from them. I'll follow up with them again today so we can get an email out to staff and get a table set up at the county administration building to recruit some employees, as well as try to have a table there too. We're approaching property tax filings and so we'll try to get something also by property taxes, try to get some individuals there. Becky Brake, the manager of the department, and I, we've had a couple conversations with Terry Allen, the health commissioner for the Board of Health, and who's been real good to us, and that we're going to partner up with some of the vaccine locations and have a table there to try to recruit poll workers, vaccinated poll workers, as well as voter education. So right now we have 3 dates on the book. July 9th will be at the Salvation Army in East Cleveland. July 13th at Woodmere Village Hall. And July 16th will be at the Bedford Heights Community Center. We also, I forget the date, but we do have 1 date set for the actual Board of Health's offices in Parma, where we'll have staff there recruiting and educating voters. We also have a couple phone calls lined up with some communication people at Metro Health, so we can try to get into some of their vaccination efforts too. So we'll try to build upon that. I did indicate we have 157 polling locations, 4 poll place changes that impacts 10 precincts. The first one is in Broadview Heights, and we are taking 3 precincts out of the Broadview Heights Community Center, Ward 2, precincts A, B, and C. We're going to move them to St. Michael's Church there. And the reason for that is it was a very busy polling location last November. One of our board members was actually working out there at that location, and I think would support that statement. So we think that this will help, taking 3 precincts out, moving them up there, and it's actually closer to kind of, I think it's on maybe the north part of the city where they live. So we're going to do that there. Richmond Heights, we have 5 precincts. Oh, and so in Broadview Heights, that's about 3,700 voters are registered in those 3 precincts. Richmond Heights, we have 5 precincts. And we're going to move them out of the Kiwanis Lodge into their new upper school. So the Kiwanis Lodge is currently undergoing renovations, and Richmond Heights just built a new upper school. And so we're able to move into this upper school, and we'll bring those 5 precincts. It's just about 4,000 voters into that nice new building. Cleveland Ward 7 Precinct T, that has about 600 voters. Next, Wilson Towers is just up the street at 55th and Chester. The voting room that we have there, they're repurposing it, so we won't be able to do voting in there anymore. So we're going from Wilson Towers to Fatima Family Center. And then lastly, Cleveland Ward 15 Precinct L. That's about 680 voters, and they were voting at the Lorraine Branch Library, and they're undergoing remodeling there. So we're moving those individuals to the Michael Zone Rec Center. So in 10 precincts in the 4 communities is about 9,000 voters. We have set out a letter to each of these impacted voters, letting them know of the poll place change, as well as they're getting the voter guide that will indicate to this location. And we'll have a little message too that says your poll place has changed. So we'll do that. And then Mike West is working with the communities just to get out there, be it the libraries or other things to try to educate voters on that.
Will we also post a sign at the, like, for example, Richmond Heights, if they should show up at the old Kiwanis Hall to say, hey, you're voting at the upper school?
Definitely. So we do that. And so a place like the Kiwanis, that'll be a sign that'll be redirecting them to the upper school. But a place like Broadview Heights Community Center, where it's still a poll place, what we're going to do, we did this for the first time in May, is John Eddy, our GIS technician, creates a sign. What he does is he highlights the area, kind of with the street ranges of the people that are moving, because you just can't say, if you say, okay, precinct or Ward 2A, only a portion of those people are going to understand. So what we do is they do know where they live, so we put on the map, and they're like, if you live here, you now go to St. Michael's. And that kind of worked out well to give them that visual of something they understood. Didn't have to really understand what their precinct information was. So we will do that at all 4 of these locations. Then again, we have the 27 municipalities. One of the things that's kind of tricky is some of the Cleveland wards. It's not all of the ward. So we'll be working with the council people to make sure they understand which parts which precincts in their ward are moving to voting hours. We're also going to be doing, Mike West is setting up, we're going to have a little press conference tomorrow. The two biggest challenges we'll get on the application for them being bad is one, not putting a party affiliation. We can't assume anything, so we need to get that corrected. If we have contact information, we'll call them, but we'll send out another application to them to get that squared away. And the second biggest challenge or rejection we anticipate will be out of district. People think, well, I vote in that, and you don't. So on our website right now, we have an interactive map right underneath the August area where you click on that, so you can get that visual nice and quick, as well as we have the list of municipalities with the precincts involved. Turnout. Now, it's not easy to this is kind of like a different one for us, doesn't happen often, so we're trying to figure out how do we figure out and prepare for this. So what we did is we looked back to the primary of 2018, that gubernatorial, in the 2020 primary, the presidential, and we tried to pull out just those individuals who had the who had the 11th congressional on their ballot. So we tried to get it down to that point, to try to get it as apples to apples as possible. In 2018, those individuals who had that race appear in their ballot, there was a 14% turnout. In 2020, it was 16% turnout. And so we're kind of basing ours off of 14%. Now, this is just, like I said, it's just candidates. In 2018, you had the statewide offices, which drew people out. You also had the statewide congressional redistricting question on the ballot, and Cuyahoga County had a Health and Human Services levy on there. So some things that maybe kind of bring people out more so. And then in 2020, we didn't have election day, so that was kind of goofy. But again, in that one, you had the presidential candidates that people were interested in, and the county also had a Health and Human Services levy on that. So there was other things that were kind of sparking people up to go vote. So we are going with 14% turnout for this, and so that 14% would be about just over 59,000 people voting. We're going to assume about 65% go to the polls on election day. So that's a little over 38,000 people. And the other 35,000 people, which will be a little over 20,000, will vote either by mail or early in person. I'm thinking typically about 8% will vote here at the board of that. So that's about 1,600 people or so will come down here and vote, and 19,000 will vote by mail. What I hope doesn't happen is in 2008, this congressional seat was on the ballot. And that's actually when former Councilman Fudge was elected. That primary in 2008 had a 3.46% turnout. 17,600 people voted. So again, being optimistic, going 14%, hoping that people want to come out, things change. Maybe they'll be energized. But the challenge is there is nothing else on the ticket to bring them out, and it's August. And August elections just by themselves don't have a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Palade. What, do we follow in the same protocols for COVID? Is that something that's directed by the Secretary of State?
So we've had conversations with the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State is not going to put out official protocols for COVID other than be safe. So we've had a conversation with Franklin County. So the 15th Congressional District is also going to be on this day, and Franklin County is the most populous there. And we're going to follow suit with what they're doing. And that's basically face coverings are recommended for individuals who aren't vaccinated. And that's what Franklin's doing, and that's kind of the Secretary of State.
Is that for our staff?
We're going to do that for voters, for staff.
So we're going to advise a voter if they're vaccinated, if they wear a mask. If they refuse, of course, we can't make them wear a mask.
Yeah, and you couldn't make them wear a mask in November either. So that's what we'll do. But we're going to send out PPE. We're going to send out hand sanitizer, rubbing alcohol. We'll have masks for everybody who wants them, individual pens, so one and done, they can keep it, throw it out, whatever they want. We do have like a cardboard, I call it a science fair board, that kind of has the clearness in there with the little thing underneath, so we'll send those out to the polls.
Will we wiping things down or no?
We will. We are hiring sanitation officials like we did, and so we'll gear them up. They'll have their vests, they'll have rubbing alcohol, and they'll wipe things down.
That just, I mean, from the latest CDC guidelines I've read, that really isn't necessary, but we're just going to continue with the practice.
We have the rubbing alcohol. We have we were buying in 55-gallon drums, and I think we have 1.5 left. So we got whatever that is, 75 gallons of rubbing alcohol.
Okay.
We'll use it up.
Any other questions for Mr. Pilati about the August election? All right, thank you for the update. Appreciate it. Any business, we have public comment here. I have a couple public comments. Do any board members have any questions or comments before we acknowledge the public comment? All right, hearing none. Mr. Dantes Taylor, is he or she? Dantes Taylor?
Sight impaired.
Yeah, right, that's right. I'm just Dantes Taylor. We're going to recognize her, Reverend Pinky, and then have you.
No, I was talking to this lady.
Okay.
I was telling her she had a comment for me, and I was trying to see if she wanted to speak, because she had some leadership. Don Ted actually wanted to challenge before you all had voted to not put him in on the process, but he didn't know your rules.
Okay.
And he's one of the people that was a candidate that you eliminated, and he actually wanted to challenge it.
Okay.
And he didn't know that he could do it.
Is he signature? Oh.
Withdraw.
Thank you.
We filed for November's work.
Right, okay. Mr. Taylor, thank you for coming down and your patience. We have a public comment period. You're permitted 5 minutes, and I'm going to clock that, okay? What would you like to say to the board, sir?
My name is Dante. My name is Dante Taylor. You hear me?
Yes. Yes.
My name is Dante Taylor, and I am trying to find out how can we get where if you're writing, how can we in the future or now get it where we can get a stamper and we can give it to our voters and if they want to vote for us and try to stamp it on the ballot. If we can get that for the future or we can get that for now.
Okay.
That's
a question. In other words, if you're a writing candidate, it's your comment, okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you'd like to see people have stamps with your name on it if you're a writing candidate, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Anybody.
All right, the law would have to be changed to permit that down in Columbus.
And who we talk to try to do that?
Well, maybe your state legislature, your state senator, your state representative you could talk to. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. We'll give you a hand, make sure you get down. Thank you, Mary. Reverend Pinckney, if you'd like to,
Good morning.
5 minutes for the board.
I got my 3 future registered voters with me today.
Okay.
Woo, mercy. All right,
All right,
Good
we're on the
morning,
clock for Reverend Pinckney.
number
Go ahead.
7, please, let the public know, about disabled, elderly, and people challenged with the electronic process for number 7, the approval of the outsourced printing. The public awareness is not sufficient for the processes. Number 12, would you put something on your website for more instructions and understanding of this process for the acknowledgement of notice of intent to retire from elected office? I don't believe that people are getting enough notice, and for instance, when Councilwoman Phyllis Cleveland left, there was just a void there. And now that Councilman Kenneth Johnson is under federal investigation, the community is going down tremendously, and people are dumping garbage all over the community, and it's neglected at this time. Number 13, what takes place after today for number 13 in terms of the not less than 2 precinct election officials for each precinct? What takes place publicly that the public can be made knowledgeable of, educated of, and aware of, so they'll know who they are to reach out to for their precincts? Number 14, I'm still concerned about the people who choose not to be a part of the electronic age and the electronic process, as well as those who are unable to do so. They're still being overlooked. When I was in Columbus on Thursday on last week, I noticed a lot of information that was very interesting to me. And it seems to be that there's this stigma that Republicans don't want people to vote. I beg to differ. I don't believe that it's a one-party process that's being challenged. I believe it's a people process. Can you still, please? Thank you. Thank you. And when I spoke to the people in Columbus, I made it very clear that I'm very displeased that they're ignoring our voices here in Calhoun County. These politicians come through here for a vote, and they leave us destitute, desolate, discredited, and disrespected. And I told them that I want them to immediately hear what you all have to say and your concerns, and I'm very disappointed that they're acting like we're insignificant when we're one of the most powerful impacting counties in this United States that determines the nation's term and its decisions. They're having an event today over at the federal building, but I don't want Republicans attacked. I want the issue attacked about this early voting, because I don't believe that you don't want people to vote or that Republicans don't want people. Will you please stop? Thank you. And this is another reason the voting is so important. The fact that I have to bring my grandchildren to a meeting means that our leadership is not even addressing family concerns as it should be. And Mr. Director Kalani, would you please let your staff know it is not their job to discipline me and tell me what they're not going to tell you when I call you and leave you a message? Please, I'm not even sure that you're getting my messages, because I'm having some real problems with Mr. Hastings with women. And we have some really serious issues. And if we don't address this, Mr. Hastings, as it should be addressed, we're heading for a very, very serious war, politically, racially, religiously, and socially, economic. And we need to be focusing on a way for families to be structured so we can have these meetings. Thank you for your time. I have got to go, but I do want to let you know that I have been advocating for you down in Columbus. And they were so blatantly disrespectful that while I was talking, addressing House Bills 22 and 109, they just got up and walked around the room talking like I was saying nothing. And Mr. Hastings, I apologize on behalf of people who don't understand, because I believe Republicans, Democrats, Independents, every party has something good. And I do what Jesus would do. And I want to bring that out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reverend Figgy. Thank you. Have a wonderful week. I appreciate your comments.
And thank you for welcoming my grandchildren. I'm working on it. They're going to be registered to vote.
It's a kid-friendly board meeting, okay?
But we do need to work on that.
Thank you.
We do need to work on that.
Thank you very much.
And Mr. Blue, I didn't call me.
Okay. Anything else from the board members? Comments, questions? We're scheduled to come back on July 21st, a little over 3.5 weeks ago. Enjoy July 4th is next weekend already, so enjoy it. I will move to adjourn today if there's a second. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye. Take care, everybody.
All right. Yes.
Yeah, me too.